A lone castle could hold off an army of 10,000. Survival depended on a kind of deep, poetic cunning. You're stepping inside the medieval mind. Architects designed walls, but also puzzles in stone. There were 25 systems that made these fortresses nearly impossible to conquer. A simple gateway became a death trap. Defenders weaponized the landscape itself. It was an arms race of intellect against force. What does it mean for a place to be unconquerable? The scale of a siege was a weapon in itself. It wasn't one battle. It was a slow pressure lasting months. An army arrives, sets up a camp. It's like they build a whole town right outside your walls, and you hear it, the constant thud of hammers building towers. The shouts, the smell of their fires drifting over. Inside, you're counting every loaf of bread, every barrel of water. Time becomes the enemy, and the attackers know that. Their goal isn't some heroic charge against strong walls. It's to create a moment of collapse, to find the weak point and hit it with everything. They might smash the gates with a ram, or dig a tunnel to collapse a tower from below, or roll a siege tower right up to the walls to pour soldiers onto them. Each of those is a complex, dangerous operation for them. And for the defenders, each one needs a specific answer, a specific counter. The castle isn't a passive shell. It's active in the fight, its shape, its structure. It's all meant to guide an enemy, to confuse them, to break them apart, to see how it works. You don't start with the walls, you start underneath them. The first line of defense is often invisible. A secret strength hidden in the ground. The secret strength started with where you put it. Before they built anything, that was the most important choice. You look at these great castles and they're always up high, on a hill, a rocky point, the edge of a cliff. It looks dramatic, and it is, but that wasn't the reason. It was the first line of defense. It turned the land into a weapon. From up there, the defenders got time. Sentries could see an army coming from miles off. See the dust, count the banners, watch them trudge closer. For the attackers, that approach was the first battle. Every step uphill wore them down. It broke their formations, made a real charge impossible. Their own siege towers, their catapults, the things meant to break the walls, became a terrible weight to drag up a slope, with arrows coming down the whole time. The ground itself was fighting for the castle, and below the surface, that high place gave another kind of protection. Often it was solid bedrock. If you tried to tunnel under, to collapse the walls from below, you were lost. Your pickaxes would just spark on the stone. Progress was inches, and the whole time you could be discovered. The hill did more than lift the castle up. It funneled the danger. It forced attackers into certain paths, up the worst slopes, right into the zones the defenders had prepared. Choosing the ground like that was a statement. It said the fight wouldn't be on open field. It would be on ground meant to break an army long before it touched a wall. That high ground meant safety, but only once you built the wall. And the wall rose straight from the bedrock, a sheer cliff of cut stone. This is the curtain wall. It's the castle's main shield, the image we all have in our heads. And that's for a reason. Its job was just to be there, to stand, to make the thought of getting past it seem impossible. These weren't thin walls, they were colossal. Often 10 feet thick, 30 feet high. They were built in layers, a core of packed rubble, stone and mortar, then faced on both sides with these precise, cut blocks. That construction gave them a terrifying strength. A catapult stone could hit the face, shatter a block, but the rubble core would just absorb the blow. The wall stood. It was brute force, but a specific kind, the force of pure endurance. For an attacker looking up, that height was a weapon. 30 feet is 3 stories. Imagine holding a ladder that long, trying to plant it on rough ground, while men at the top drop stones straight down on you. The face offered no kindness. No handholds, it was a smooth, unforgiving surface meant to reject you. But the curtain wall's genius was it was never just a wall. It was a stage, a backbone. The solid canvas where every other defense was painted, its flat top became a walkway, its mass-supported towers, its face was pierced for arrow loops. The wall forced the game. It told attackers, you can't come over me easily, so you must try to go through me or under me. And by forcing that choice, it guided them right into the traps waiting at every gate. A wall, no matter how high, has a base, and that base is a weakness. So before an enemy could even reach the stone, they faced the moat. This wasn't just a ditch. It was a layered problem, a trap that began the moment you tried to cross. A wide, deep trench completely encircling the fortress, often filled with water, drawn from a river or a spring. That water wasn't just for show, it made the ground near the walls soft, unstable. The idea of tunneling underneath to collapse the foundations, nearly impossible. Your tunnel would flood before you got halfway, and those massive siege towers, the kind that could bridge the gap to the top of the wall, they were hard to move on flat land. Now try to push one through a water-filled trench, or up and out of a dry one. It was a recipe for getting stuck, a perfect target for arrows, but the moat's true cruelty was the geometry it forced. Whether wet or dry, it created a killing zone. Attackers had to go down into that trench to cross it, and once they were down there, they were trapped below the level of the defenders on the walls. It was like being at the bottom of a well, looking up. Their arrows came down in a deadly rain. Your own arrows fired upward lost their power, their accuracy. You were exposed, crowded, struggling. The moat also secretly made the walls taller. A siege ladder had to be long enough to span the width of the trench and still reach the top of the wall. That meant a heavier ladder, more cumbersome, almost impossible to position steadily on the far side. Some accounts suggest moats were sometimes deliberately kept foul. A harsh measure to discourage a prolonged crossing, to increase the hardship for a trapped force. It was a clear statement in earth and water. The moat said the real battle didn't start at the wall. It started here, in this space where you were already at a disadvantage. That impassable moat left just one question. How do you get across? The answer was a bridge. But a bridge that could disappear. The drawbridge was the final point of control. It was the only way in from the outside world to the sanctuary inside. And it was entirely conditional. In peaceful times it was down, a gesture of openness, a path for trade. But that was a courtesy. The moment danger came, that courtesy ended. With a groan of wood and the sound of chains, the bridge would rise. Men would turn capstans or release counterweights, and the whole roadway would lift up against the gatehouse. In moments, the path was gone, just a blank face of timber, often covered in iron. The moat was whole again, an unbroken ring. This was more than pulling up a plank. It was a definitive act. Raising the drawbridge meant the castle was declaring a siege. It cut the last physical link. Anyone outside was now part of the problem. Inside, it sealed everyone's fate together. The mechanics had a kind of clever poetry. Simple designs used ropes and pulleys, but the best ones used a counterweight. A heavy box of stone or lead was attached to the inner end of the bridge. To raise it, you just released a lock. The weight would drop into a pit inside the gatehouse, and its force would pull the bridge up. To lower it, you'd winch the weight back up, settling the bridge into place. Some later designs used a bascule, like a giant seesaw, that made it harder for attackers to use hooks to pull it back down. The drawbridge was the castle's hand, extended in welcome or clenched into a fist. Its operation was the first psychological move in a siege. It told the enemy the time for talking was over. But sealing the gate was just the start. The real ingenuity was in what happened if someone actually got across. If that drawbridge came down and an enemy got across, they weren't safe. They were in the trap. The gatehouse was the castle's contradiction. the weakest point, the only hole in the shell, so they made it the strongest place. A fortress inside the fortress, a stone throat built not to welcome but to swallow. Picture a dark tunnel just wide enough for a wagon. That's the gate passage. You break through the outer door, heavy timber and iron. You're inside, but you're not in the courtyard. You're in a long, shadowy corridor, stone walls pressing in. The light fades behind you. Ahead, another gate, another portcullis blocking the way. You're in a stone box, and the box had teeth. From the ceiling, holes opened up. Murder holes, the name says it all. From up there, defenders had a straight line down into the packed crowd below. What came down was a calculated horror. Not just arrows, heavy stones dropped from that height could break armor. Boiling water, hot sand sifting through armor seams. There are accounts of quicklime, a powder that reacted with water, creating a blinding, burning cloud in that tight space. It was a vertical battlefield. The men below had no defense. They couldn't fight back. They could only shield themselves or push forward into the next barrier or retreat back out into the arrows in the courtyard. But the attack didn't just come from above. The walls of the passage were lined with narrow slits, arrow loops, Meurtrières for lateral fire. A defender in a small chamber could fire an arrow or thrust a spear through those slits, hitting the flanks of anyone in the passage. The geometry was cruel. An attacker had to worry about arrows from the front, from the sides, and death raining from above. No cover, no room to maneuver. The gate passage turned the enemy's greatest asset, their numbers, into a weakness. A crowd became a target, and often this deadly corridor wasn't straight. It would take a sharp turn, a dogleg right in the middle, so a charging force lost all its momentum. They couldn't see what was ahead, and it stopped anyone outside from firing a ballista shot straight through the gate into the castle's heart. Every step was controlled, every advantage stripped away. The gatehouse was psychological warfare in stone. It offered a glimpse of the interior of victory just beyond that final gate. But to reach it, you had to walk through a gauntlet designed to break an army's will. The door was open, but the price of entry was everything. Even after you made it through all that, you still weren't in. Because deep inside the tunnel, up in the dark, there was one last answer waiting. The portcullis, a grid of iron or heavy wood with spikes at the bottom like teeth. Just hanging there, held by a rope, a counterweight, a pin. So when the outer gates finally broke and the attackers started pouring into that stone passage, the defender had one job. Pull the lever, drop the lock, and then you'd hear it, the shriek of metal on stone as it fell. That crash was a full stop. It didn't just block the way. It cut the attack right in half. The men in front, now trapped ahead of it, were suddenly alone, finished, and the men behind, stuck outside this iron grid, could only watch as arrows and stones came down on their friends from the murder holes up above. The passage wasn't a corridor anymore. It was a sealed tomb, and some of the strongest castles didn't have just one. They had two, sometimes three, spaced out along the tunnel. You could break the first one and think you'd won, only to find yourself in a smaller chamber between two iron walls, with death coming from everywhere. The effect on your mind was deep. It meant that no breakthrough was ever really final. Even if you burned the big doors, even if you smashed the beams, your victory was a trick. Because this iron grating was still there, almost impossible to get through. To pass it, you'd have to try to lift it, a crushing job while things were being thrown at you, or try to cut through the bars slow and loud. The whole time you were out in the open, the portcullis was the castle's final say, a last word written in iron. It said you don't get to just walk in. You only get in if you're willing to pay a price almost no one would. That iron portcullis was the last resort. The real strategy was to stop an enemy from ever getting that far. So they built a trap outside the gate, the Barbican. It was an outer gauntlet, a separate fortress, and its only job was to be a checkpoint of pure hardship. Picture yourself as a soldier in that army. You've crossed the moat. Ahead is the main gatehouse, massive, but between you and it is another set of walls, forming a narrow, walled corridor. That's the Barbican. It's not part of the main castle. It's a decoy, a sacrificial piece. Its purpose is to make you pay for every step toward the real entrance. To get in, you had to go through its own small, heavily defended gate, and once inside, you were in a stone channel, maybe wide enough for 5 men to walk side by side. The walls on either side were high, and the top was lined with defenders. You were in a shooting gallery. From above, arrows, crossbow bolts, stones all raining down in a concentrated hail. No cover, no way to effectively fire back. The geometry was everything. These corridors were almost never straight. They bent, they zigzagged, they turned at sharp angles. That served 2 brutal purposes. First, it broke any charge. A running mass of soldiers would pile into a corner, losing all momentum and formation, becoming a packed, chaotic target. Second, it made a battering ram useless. You couldn't get a long, heavy ram and a team of men around a 90-degree turn in a narrow alley while being shot at. It was impossible, so the Barbican stripped the attackers of their primary tools before they even saw the main gate. You had to survive this outer courtyard of death just to earn the right to face the gatehouse and its own horrors. The psychological toll was immense. Men would watch their comrades fall in this preliminary space, knowing the worst was still ahead. It thinned ranks. It shattered morale. It consumed time and lives. The Barbican was a declaration. It said the castle's reach extended beyond its walls, that the ground for 50 feet in front of the gate was not neutral territory. It was part of the machine, and surviving it didn't mean you won. It only meant you were now allowed to begin the real test, the far more terrible one. Even after the outer walls came down, the fight wasn't over, because at the center, rising above everything, was the keep, the castle's final argument. A fortress inside the fortress, sometimes called the donjon, but it was more than a tower. It was a statement, in stone. Its presence alone told you this was layered defiance. You could take the courtyard, but you hadn't taken the castle. The keep was the Lord's power made visible, and it was built to be the last place anyone would ever have to defend. Everything about it spoke permanence, isolation. The walls weren't just thick, they were monstrous, 15 feet or more of solid masonry. The ground floor was usually a windowless cellar. For grain, salted meat, the treasury, there was no grand entrance at ground level. Instead, the main door was raised up to the first floor, reached by a narrow wooden staircase. And that staircase wasn't permanent. It was meant to be removed or destroyed in moments, like pulling the ladder up behind you. Suddenly, the base of the tower was just a smooth, unscalable surface. Attackers below staring up at a blank wall, defenders above looking down from absolute control. Inside, the keep was its own world. It had its own well. A shaft dug deep through the stone to the water below. Storerooms stocked to last months. Upper floors held the great hall, private chambers, a chapel. So even if the outer bailey was overrun, even if the enemy was camped in the courtyard, the heart of the castle could hold out. The defenders weren't just trapped. They were secure, supplied, watching from on high. That changed the whole psychology of a siege's final stage. For attackers, breaching the outer walls was supposed to be the climax. Instead, it revealed a deeper, harder challenge. Now they faced a fresh garrison, rested and ready, looking down from an impregnable tower. Their momentum died right there in the keep's shadow. The design forced a terrible calculus. To take it, you'd have to start the siege process all over again, but in a much more confined, deadly space. You could try to mine its corner, but its foundations were often as deep as its walls were thick. You could try to batter down its door, but that meant building a ramp or a siege tower just to reach the entrance, all while under fire from directly above. Every option was slow, costly, demoralizing. The keep's ultimate purpose was to make victory feel hollow. It asked one simple, devastating question: how much are you willing to sacrifice for what's behind this last door? And many decided the price was too high. The keep was tall, but that was just one piece of it. There was a whole geometry to it. If you see the shape of a castle, you'll notice the tops of the walls and towers. They stick out like stone eyebrows, and that wasn't just decoration. It was an answer to a problem, a fatal flaw in a straight, vertical wall. They called it the dead ground. The blind spot, right at the bottom of the wall. A defender up on the battlements couldn't see it, couldn't reach it. It was a sliver of safety. An attacker could work there unseen. You could chip at the foundation, you could set a ladder. That little space was a crack, so the answer was the Machicolation, a stone gallery built out from the top. Its floor wasn't solid, it was a grid, openings between stone supports. From the wall walk behind it, a defender could step up, look straight down through those holes. See everything at the base. The blind spot was gone, and it became a killing zone. Through those openings they could drop things, not just arrows, heavy things. Rocks from that height, boiling water, hot sand. It would pour down in a stream. There are stories of quicklime, a powder that could blind. It would sift down through helmets. The effect was physical and psychological. For an attacker at the wall, there was no safe place to stand. The castle itself seemed to attack, reaching out from its stone to strike down. The Machicolation turned the perimeter into a ledge of death. Every foot of wall was armed. It meant that getting close, touching the fortress, was maybe the most dangerous part. You were inviting a response from directly overhead, nowhere to hide. That simple overhang erased the idea of shelter, made the approach a gamble. From that gallery hanging over the wall, you could look down. But to fight, you had to stand up, and standing on top of a wall in a battle is dangerous. That's what the castle's crown is for, the Crenellations, those teeth along the top. They weren't decoration, they were a rhythm, a back and forth between safety and attack. The high stone blocks are merlons. You stand behind one, you're shielded. You're hidden. You could take your time there, knock an arrow, crank a crossbow, get a rock ready. Then you step to the side, into the low gap next to it. That gap is the crenel, the opening. From there you have a clear shot. You loose the arrow, throw the rock, and then you step back behind the merlon. Safe again. It was a cycle, hide and reveal, and it meant the wall top was never empty. One archer steps back to reload, another steps forward to shoot. A constant barrage from the battlements, but the defenders are only exposed for a second, just to aim and release. It turned the wall top from an exposed platform into a shielded firing position. The design understood the pace of a fight. A crossbow was powerful but slow. All that time cranking it, you were vulnerable. The merlon gave you that time back. It was a pocket of calm, a stone shield. You could prepare your next shot without fear, but the Crenellations could adapt. Those gaps, the crenels, could be fitted with wooden panels. In peace they were open. When a siege came, workers would mount heavy timber frames out over the gaps. Those were the hoardings, temporary wooden galleries projecting from the wall. Their floors had holes. They were instant Machicolations, so the castle could grow more teeth when danger approached. The hoardings added another layer. Defenders could drop things straight down on attackers at the base, all while protected by a roof and wooden walls, so the stone notches were a modular system. The baseline was the shield and window of the Crenellations, and when the threat escalated, you could bolt on the added cruelty of the hoardings. It was architecture that could change its mind. That could become more aggressive when it needed to. Every castle silhouette against the sky with those jagged cuts is telling you a story. It's a machine built for a specific purpose. A machine where even the skyline was engineered for that balance between staying alive and dealing death. The stone crown above was a shield, but the wall was a weapon. Those thick curtains of masonry weren't solid. They were breathing, they were watching, and they could strike. Pierced through the stone were these narrow vertical cuts. The arrow slit. From far off it looked like a flaw, just a hairline crack in the fortress skin, but it was a calculated eye, a controlled vision, a piece of lethal geometry. From the outside, that slit was a nightmare. It was a target less than an inch wide, trying to hit it with an arrow to send a shot back through that was pure luck. Nearly impossible. The stone around it was angled, so incoming shots got deflected away. The slit itself gave nothing away, no shadow, no movement, just a dark line in the stone. But you step inside the wall, into the chamber behind it. The world changes. That narrow crack blossoms. The inside of the wall is carved out into a wide, splayed recess. It's like standing in a stone funnel. The archer has room to stand, to brace, and from there they have a sweeping field of view, a wide arc of the ground outside. They can track movement, they can aim and fire, all while being almost completely protected. The thick stone encases them. Only the weapon's tip needs to approach the opening. The design evolved, became a brutal art. The simple vertical slit was joined by more complex shapes, the cross-shaped loophole, a vertical cut with a horizontal bar across it. That let the defender track a target moving horizontally, sweep their aim side to side without moving. Then the keyhole slit, a round opening at the bottom of a vertical cut. The round hole was for the stock of a crossbow, a stable firing point. The vertical slot above let them aim up or down. They could fire a plunging shot straight down, right at the base of their own wall, into that blind spot, eliminating the last refuge for anyone trying to mine the foundations or set a ladder. The effect on an attacker was profound. A soldier advancing across the killing ground wasn't just facing a wall. He was facing a surface alive with hidden threats. Every few feet, another dark line in the stone. Each one a potential source of a sudden bolt. No warning, no archer leaning over the battlements, just the snap of a crossbow from an unseen place, a bolt materializing from the stone itself. It created paranoia. The fortress wasn't just defending itself, it was observing, judging, and it could reach out from anywhere. This turned the simple act of approaching the wall into a test of nerve. You weren't charging a line of men, you were charging a piece of architecture designed to see you and to kill you without ever showing itself. The arrow slit erased the archer. It made the wall itself the archer, the perfect expression of the castle's defensive philosophy. Maximum protection for the defender, maximum exposure for the attacker. The fortress didn't just stand against you, it stared back, and from within that stone gaze, death was always a breath away. The wall had a weakness, it was the shape. For centuries, the towers were square. They looked solid, imposing, like power cut from stone, but in a siege, that shape was a problem. The corners were a gift. They were the perfect target for a catapult. A flat surface takes the full force, it cracks, but worse, those sharp corners were a flaw below ground. For the miners, that corner was the spot. They could dig their tunnel right to it, set the fire, and collapse the supports. The physics were simple. When that corner foundation gave way, the whole weight of the tower above would fall into the hole. It would tear a breach in the wall. The square tower's strength was an illusion. Its geometry betrayed it, so the castle changed. It lost its corners. The round tower was the answer, but it wasn't just a new shape, it was a new idea. A curved surface has no flat target. A stone from a trebuchet doesn't hit straight on. It glances off, it skids, it ricochets away, the tower shrugs it off. The difference was total. Where a square tower would gather damage, its face turning to rubble, the round tower would stay intact. Scarred but standing, the curve was a shield, and that smooth surface went below the earth, too. There was no corner for a miner to target. The curved foundation spread the tower's weight evenly in all directions. To collapse it, sappers would have to undermine a huge section of the circumference. That was much harder. It took far more time. It was far more likely to be found. The round tower turned mining from a sure tactic into a gamble, but its real genius was communal. A single round tower was strong. A line of them was a system. Because from the top of one round tower, defenders could see clearly along the wall. They could see right down to the base of the next tower. That blind spot, that dead ground at the neighbor's foot, was now covered. Archers could provide overlapping fields of fire. An attacker trying to scale the wall between towers would be caught in a crossfire, shot from both sides. And from above, the round tower didn't just defend itself, it protected the others. It turned the perimeter from a series of isolated points into a connected web. Observation and lethal support, that shift from square to round was a clear example. The castle as a learning machine. It was architecture listening to the battlefield. Hearing the crack of stone on a flat surface, the rumble of a collapsing corner, and responding not with thicker walls but with smarter curves, the fortress was thinking. And its thoughts were written in a new, circular logic. The round tower was a smart idea, but it was just one layer. The real evolution of that thinking was to multiply it. The Concentric Castle, a fortress built with 2, sometimes 3, complete and separate walls, one inside the other, a castle within a castle, and that changed the entire calculation of an attack. The outer wall was the first obstacle. It was strong on its own with its own towers and gates, but if an attacker broke through, if they got their men inside, they didn't find a courtyard. They didn't find the center, they found another wall, taller, thicker, looking down on them. Now they were in a trap, a wide, open space between the walls. The outer ward, the killing ground, and from that higher inner wall, defenders had a clear line of sight to everything below. They could shoot over their own men still on the outer wall. Arrows and bolts raining down into that penned-in crowd. The attackers were exposed. They had the outer wall at their backs, now retaken by the enemy, and the taller inner wall in front of them. A stone canyon with death coming from the high cliffs on every side. No cover, no good way to shoot back upward, and no easy way forward, because the inner gatehouse was a fresh, untouched fortress. Their momentum, that surge from breaking the first gate, died right there in that open space. You see it in places like Crac des Chevaliers or Beaumaris Castle in Wales. At Beaumaris, the walls were perfectly spaced. The outer wall was low enough that defenders on the inner wall could use their longbows to sweep the whole area between them. An army that got over the first wall would be funneled into this prepared zone and taken apart. The concentric design was a deep shift in thinking. It accepted that a single wall, no matter how strong, could fall. So instead of one absolute barrier, it created depth. It created a sequence of problems. Solving the first one just made the next one harder. It turned the castle from a shield into a series of questions. And each question demanded a higher price, in blood, in time. For a medieval commander looking up at those stacked rings of stone, the message was clear. You're not just attacking a place, you're attacking a process, and the process was built for your destruction. All those walls, though, they created a prison. A perfect one. A castle under siege was surrounded. Its outer ring was the enemy, but the people inside still needed to move. They needed to act, not just wait. That's where the secret came in, the Postern gate, a hidden door, not for ceremony, not for trade, for survival. A small, heavy door, iron-banded, set low in the wall. Often at the rear, where the land was steep, or tucked into a corner masked by a tower's shadow, built to be missed, forgotten by anyone looking from the outside. Its purposes were quiet and crucial. In the dead of night, a single messenger could slip out, a man who knew the hidden paths. His job was to carry a plea for help, or to bring back news of a relief force. That slender thread of information could change everything. It broke the isolation, the psychological isolation of a siege. But the postern was also for attack. It was the launch point for a sortie. The main gates were sealed, the drawbridge up, the enemy felt secure. Then, without warning, that small door would swing open. A band of knights and men-at-arms, maybe 50 strong, would pour out, silent, fast. Their target wasn't the main army. It was the siege engines, the trebuchets. The towers, they would set them ablaze, cause chaos, and then, just as quickly, they'd retreat, back through that same small door. It would slam shut and be barred behind them. The psychological blow was immense. It told the besiegers they were not safe, even in their own lines, that the castle could strike back, but the Postern's final purpose, its most solemn one, was as an exit of last resort. If the walls were breached, if the keep was doomed, this was the path out for the Lord, his family, a corps of knights. To flee, to live, to fight another day, it was the acknowledgement that no stone, no matter how thick, is eternal, that preserving the people inside was sometimes the final victory. So this humble door was always defended like a treasure. It had its own portcullis, its own murder holes. The path to it inside was a maze, easy for a defender to navigate in the dark, impossible for an intruder to find. The postern gate was the castle's whisper, a reminder that even in the most dire confinement, the idea of movement, of choice, of a way out was never fully surrendered. It kept hope alive in the stone. The postern gate was quiet, but the castle could shout, and that shout came from the hoardings. They weren't stone, they were temporary. A quick answer to an army coming close. Before a siege, the castle's shape would change. Workers would be up on the walls, bolting together heavy timber frames, building outward, making these covered wooden galleries that stuck out from the top of the stone like spines. From far off you could see it. The castle was growing new teeth. The hoardings were a way to turn the whole wall into an overhang without years of masonry. Their purpose was direct. A defender could step off the stone walkway right into this wooden cage. Now they were suspended over the enemy. The floor wasn't solid. It had holes, and through those holes they had a straight line of fire, straight down to the base of their own wall. That blind spot was gone, the place an attacker might feel safe. From there, they could drop stones, pour heated sand or water. The effect was immediate. For anyone scaling a ladder or mining the foundation, they weren't attacking a wall anymore. They were attacking a ceiling that was trying to kill them. The psychological impact was deep. It made the castle feel alive, aggressive, reaching out to strike. Wood had its weakness, of course. Fire was the fear. But they'd cover them in wet hides, and their value was in speed. They could be built fast when danger came, taken down just as fast when peace returned. The hoarding was the final preparation. The moment the residence stopped being a home and became an instrument of war, that bristling, temporary shape was a declaration. It told the army watching, every advantage of height, every position was about to be used without mercy. The stone was ready, and now the wood was too. That wooden gallery was a shield. To strike back, the castle had to reach out, hit the enemy where they felt safe. That needed a different structure, a tower built not for shelter but for sight. For the shot, the belfry. In many castles there's one tower that stands apart, taller, more slender, positioned to command the widest view. It was the castle's eye. Its long arm. Attackers built their own lumbering siege towers to reach the walls. The belfry was the permanent answer, a built-in counter-siege tower. Its purpose was active defense. From that height, defenders weren't just looking for armies, they were calculating trajectories. The top became an artillery platform. They could mount a counterweight trebuchet, the most powerful siege weapon of the age, or a large ballista, a giant crossbow for heavy bolts, terrifying accuracy. Now the scene from that vantage. The besieging army is camped hundreds of yards out. They feel secure. Just outside arrow range, they're assembling their own engines, their towers and catapults in what they think is a safe zone. Then from the top of that slender stone finger, a stone the size of a man's torso arcs into the sky. It climbs, hangs for a moment, then plummets down into the heart of their camp. It smashes a siege tower into splinters, lands amidst a supply wagon. The message is instantaneous, chilling. There is no safe distance. The castle's reach extends far beyond its moat. It can hit you in your own home. This reversed the entire dynamic. The attackers who were supposed to apply pressure suddenly found themselves under it. They had to fortify their own camp, build protective screens for their engines. They had to constantly look up, not just at the walls they were trying to scale, but at that single, dominant tower, wondering when the next projectile would come. It consumed their attention, their resources. The Belfry turned the castle from a fortress under attack into a fortress that could attack. It was a statement of capability. It said the strength within these walls is not just for enduring your assault. It is for projecting power back at you, for breaking your tools and your morale before you can even use them. This was defense redefined, not as a wall, but as a sphere of influence, a zone of control that began at the castle's heart and ended only where its stones could fall. Stone and wood were what you saw. The real strength was something else, water. The moat was a barrier, but it was also a weapon, a kind of control. An enemy would be looking up at the walls. They wouldn't think about the ground, about what could come from below. The big fear in a siege was mining, digging under a wall to bring it down. It was slow work underground. But a castle that planned for water could use that. They built channels connected to the moat or a hidden source. When they heard digging or found the tunnel, they could open a gate. And the water would come in fast. In a dark, narrow space, there was nowhere to go. It wasn't a fight, it was just releasing a force. The message was that even the earth wasn't safe. The castle's power went that deep, and water was about keeping the castle alive too. The well was the heart. It had to be secure. A simple well could be poisoned or run dry. So they made them deep, dug straight down through rock to clean water, or they built cisterns underneath, hidden to catch rain. It wasn't just about having water. It was about time. A siege works by waiting, but if the defenders have a sure supply and the army outside is drinking from a muddy river, time shifts. In the best castles, they managed the whole landscape, sluice gates and canals to raise or lower the moat, to set a trap. There are stories of them using a river, releasing a flood into a camp below, a wall of water through the tents, ruining supplies, turning the ground to mud. That was control. The castle wasn't just sitting on the land. It was a part of it, commanding the element. Water was life and it was death. The intelligence wasn't just in the stone, it was in seeing the land as an ally. And if the land could fight for you, what else could you use? A castle's power was in the mind before any stone was ever thrown. That silhouette against the sky was an argument, a statement of permanence. It made the idea of an attack seem foolish, but that was just the start. The real war was quieter. It began with symbols. You'd approach the gate, and you wouldn't just see wood and iron. You'd see carvings, heraldic beasts, a coat of arms chiseled deep into the stone above. Those weren't decorations, they were a legal claim, a declaration of ancient right. They told you weren't just challenging a garrison, you were challenging history, a lineage, a name that commanded loyalty for miles. Banners flew from the towers, snapping in the wind, visible for leagues. Each one a silent boast of wealth and confidence. It projected an image of a community that was prepared, proud, legitimate. It was a performance of power meant to seed doubt, to make a commander question not just his tactics but his right to be there. Then came the sounds. From inside those high walls, a besieging army would hear the life of the fortress. Not silence, not fear, but activity. The distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, shouted orders from sergeants drilling men, the ring of practice swords in the yard. These weren't the sounds of a place under strain. They were the sounds of a place at work, a machine being tuned. It signaled relentless readiness. It told the men lying in the cold mud outside that their opponents were not idle. They were preparing, sharpening, waiting. That auditory proof of normalcy inside was a subtle torment for those outside. Sometimes the warfare turned more direct. To break the monotony and fear of a siege, defenders might use a brutal form of communication. There are accounts from various conflicts of objects being launched from catapults back into the besiegers' camp. The intent wasn't physical damage, it was a message, a grim demonstration of what happened to those who came too close, and a forecast of the fate awaiting the rest. It was a shocking act meant to instill dread, to portray the defenders not as fellow soldiers but as merciless, beyond negotiation. The cover of night could be weaponized too. A time for exhausted soldiers to rest, defenders might play loud, discordant music, the blare of horns, the crash of cymbals at irregular intervals. The goal was simple: to deny sleep, to grind down the attacker's nerves through constant, unpredictable disturbance. A sleep-deprived army is a demoralized army. Slow to react and quick to anger, all of this served one master: the erosion of will. The castle wasn't meant to be seen as a static pile of stone. It was to be felt as a living, watchful entity. An intelligent opponent that fought not only with arrows and boiling oil, but with doubt, with fear, with a calculated cruelty designed to make the cost of victory feel too high. This mental layer of defense asked a question more piercing than any arrow. Do you have the spirit to see this through? Because the stones, it seemed, certainly did. And if the mind could be a fortress, what happened when the fortress itself began to think like a general? The mind of the castle was a trap, but the body was a maze. You could breach the outer shell, but you wouldn't find an open courtyard. You'd find a town built for your destruction. The bailey, that interior space, was a landscape of controlled chaos. It was never empty, it was filled with purpose: stables, workshops, storehouses, kitchens, the chapel, and each structure was placed with a cruel precision. They weren't arranged for convenience, they were arranged for control. The open ground was carved up by these buildings into a network of narrow, winding lanes. There was no straight path from the broken gate to the keep's door. You were forced into a twisting route, a predetermined channel. You and your men would be funneled into these tight corridors. Your view blocked by timber walls, by overhanging roofs. Your formation, that vital mass of a charging force, would just shatter. You'd become a confused line, stumbling forward into the unknown, and that's when the bailey would wake up. A sudden volley of crossbow bolts from a doorway ahead, stones raining down from a rooftop to your left. A side alley you thought was an escape would turn out to be a dead end, and men would be waiting at the closed gate at its end. Every corner was a potential ambush point. Every shadow could hold a defender. The design robbed you of initiative. You couldn't choose your path. The architecture chose it for you, and it always chose the path of maximum exposure. The main routes, such as they were, often led you right under the gaze of the keep, directly into the line of fire from its arrow slits. You'd be fighting in the courtyard, but you'd feel the eyes of that final tower on you. The entire time, even seemingly harmless buildings were part of the scheme. A storage barn might have its lower walls built of stone with narrow openings, turning it into a miniature blockhouse. The chapel, a place of peace, was often one of the sturdiest stone buildings after the keep. Its thick walls and small windows made it a perfect fallback position. A secondary stronghold if the outer yard was overrun. The entire layout was a lesson in momentum. The goal of any attack is to maintain speed and force, to carry that energy from the breach straight to the heart. The bailey's maze was designed to absorb that energy, to dissipate it in 100 confusing turns and sudden, violent stops. It turned the castle's interior from a sanctuary into another battlefield, one where the defenders knew every alley, every blind spot, every secure door. And the invaders knew nothing, so taking the wall was not victory. It was just an invitation to enter the labyrinth, and in that labyrinth the rules were written by the castle. That interior maze was a trap, but the real ambush points were even more specific. Murder holes in the ceiling dealt death from above. Their counterpart was waiting in the walls. The Meurtrière, it sounds like an arrow slit, but it was specialized engineering. Its purpose was singular, to give a crossbowman the perfect shot in the worst possible place. You'd find these narrow openings flanking a gateway built into the sides of the dark passage itself. They weren't for looking out, they were for killing in. From the outside, just another dark line in the stone, but step inside the chamber behind it. The wall opens up into a small, sheltered space. The opening itself is shaped differently. Often a simple vertical slit, sometimes a round hole at the bottom with a thin slot above it. That round hole is the key. It's a brace. A crossbowman could place the heavy stock of his weapon right into that recess. It locked the weapon in place, gave him a rock-steady platform. Now he wasn't just holding a crossbow, he was anchoring it to the castle itself. He could take careful, unhurried aim through the vertical slot above. Completely encased in stone, only the bolt's tip exposed to the chaos outside. This changed the geometry of the Gatehouse fight. Murder holes rained destruction from overhead, a vertical battlefield. The Meurtrière created a horizontal one. Imagine you're an attacker who's just burst through the outer gate. You're in that long, shadowy tunnel. The Portcullis is ahead. Men are screaming, things are dropping from the ceiling, and then, from the side walls, you see the flash, not from a man leaning out, from the stone itself. A crossbow bolt fired from point-blank range, with the full power of a weapon braced against solid masonry. At that distance, it could punch through plate armor. There was no dodging it, no warning, just a snap and an impact. The bolt seemed to come from the wall, as if the fortress itself was shooting at you. This was precision terror in a space of pure chaos. It ensured every single inch of that deadly corridor was covered. You couldn't press yourself against the wall for cover from the murder holes because the wall itself might kill you. The Meurtrière turned the gate passage from a dangerous channel into a shooting gallery with no safe corners. It was the final piece of the Gatehouse's cruel puzzle. A reminder that in the belly of the beast, death came from every direction at once. And if the walls themselves could think like an archer, what happened when the entire landscape was designed to think like a general? You came through the outer gate, that first rush carrying you in, and you think you're headed straight for the courtyard, a clear path to push your men through. But then you hit a wall, a real one, just a few feet inside. The passage doesn't go forward. It forces you to turn, a sharp 90-degree bend, right or left. That's the bent entrance, and in that moment, everything changes. Your momentum, that force you need, it just dies against the stone. Your tight formation collapses. Everyone's trying to funnel around the same corner. You're not an attacking force anymore. You're a traffic jam in a very dangerous place. The geometry itself is giving orders, breaking your spirit before anyone even fights you. And this turn had real physical effects. Take the battering ram, a huge log of wood tipped with iron, swung by a dozen men. You need it for the inner gates, the portcullises, but you need a long, straight run to build power, and inside a bent entrance, that run doesn't exist. You get the ram through the outer gate, and there's just no space to swing it. The corridor's too narrow, the turns too sharp, the ram becomes a useless log. Blocking your own men, your main tool for breaking deeper in, is gone, neutralized by a corner, and you're left with hand tools and time, two things you don't have while standing in a killing zone. But the real genius of the bend was the target it created. As your soldiers shuffled around that corner, they were exposed in the worst way. Their shields, held to face the front, were now pointing the wrong way. Their armored sides, the weaker flank, were turned toward the inner length of the passage, and along that inner wall were the arrow loops, the Meurtrières. Defenders had a clear, uninterrupted line of fire. right at the exposed side of every man turning that corner. It was like shooting at the broad side of a barn. One archer could pick off soldier after soldier, each one performing the same vulnerable pivot. The bent entrance turned the gatehouse from a barrier into a slaughterhouse. An assembly line where the enemy had to present themselves for execution, one by one. It took the chaos of a siege and made it predictable, repeatable. Fatal, this wasn't just building a wall, it was building a trap that worked every single time. Just because of the way people move, the castle's intelligence was in the very path your feet had to follow. Stone Machicolations came later. They were the permanent answer, but that blind spot was a problem long before stone. The first solution was wood, the Brattice. A brutal, simple idea. When danger was coming, workers would bolt these heavy timber frames right onto the wall face, not just at the top, sometimes lower down at the weak points. These wooden cages jutted out over the killing zone. From inside, a defender had the same advantage as the later stone galleries, a straight drop to the base of the wall. They could lean out through openings in the floor, hurl stones, pour boiling water, thrust spears down at anyone trying to scale the wall or mine the foundations. The effect was immediate. It turned a vertical wall into an overhang, an impassable cliff for an attacker. It meant there was no safe place to stand. No safe place to work. The castle seemed to grow these new, threatening limbs right before a siege. This timber solution had a raw logic. Stone Machicolations were expensive. They took years to build into the design. A Brattice could be assembled in days or weeks from local lumber. If it was burned by fire arrows or smashed by a catapult, it could be repaired just as fast. Defense as a renewable resource, the wood creaked, it groaned. It was vulnerable. Everyone knew that, but its value was speed, adaptability. A lord facing a sudden threat didn't have years to remodel. He had weeks to prepare. The Brattice gave him that. It was like boarding up the windows before a storm, a temporary measure, but one that could mean holding the castle or falling. These wooden projections are a window into the medieval mind at war, a willingness to innovate with what was at hand, to solve an urgent problem not with grand, eternal monuments, but with immediate, clever carpentry. The Brattice acknowledged a temporary weakness, and it built a temporary shield. It was an intermediate step in the arms race between wall and attacker. A proof of concept built in pine and oak that would later be rendered in stone. That evolutionary step speaks to something deeper. These fortresses were never finished. They were always learning, adapting. The next time the enemy came, the wooden gallery might be gone, but the lesson it taught was now part of the castle. Permanently, the moat was a barrier, but the castle's thinking went past the water. It was in the shape of the trench itself. There's a term, Counterscarp. It sounds like engineering, and it is, but its purpose was simple. It was cruel. The Counterscarp was the outer wall of the moat, the side facing away from the castle. And they didn't leave it as a slope. They reinforced it. They lined it with timber or stone, made it a steep cliff, slick, that did one thing. It made the moat a trap you couldn't climb out of. Picture yourself as a soldier. You've gotten down into that ditch. It's water or mud. You're trying to cross to reach the main wall. But to get out on the other side, you have to climb this sheer face. It's like a smooth-sided pit. You're exposed, scrambling for a grip, and arrows are coming down from above. The Counterscarp turned the moat from an obstacle into a pen. But the real clever part was when they weaponized that outer wall. In later designs, they built openings right into it, low slits just above the waterline. From outside, they were nearly invisible, but from inside, from hidden chambers behind them, defenders could fire horizontally along the length of the ditch. That's called enfilading fire. It means shooting down a line, like running your hand along piano keys. In that confined space, the effect was terrible. Before, an attacker in the ditch only worried about arrows from above. Now they had to worry about bolts from the side. from a hidden position at their own level. A defender in a Counterscarp casemate could look down the ditch and see a line of men struggling. A single shot could pass through several, could sweep the ditch clean. That was a deep shift. It meant the moat wasn't a passive ring anymore. It was an active firing position, an extension of the castle's reach. The ground itself had become a defender. It showed this meticulous attention. Every part of the landscape was considered. Every path an enemy might take was mapped, and a response was built into the earth. The Counterscarp was a quiet refinement. It didn't have the drama of a tower or the final crash of a Portcullis, but in its way it was perfect. It expressed the castle's philosophy. Leave no angle open, offer no safe spot, make every step toward the walls a step into another layer of prepared violence. It asked a silent question of anyone looking at that ditch. Do you really know what you're walking into? The defenses all worked on the surface. The final challenge was the ground itself. In those dramatic spots, a sheer cliff, a narrow mountain ridge, the fortress looked like it grew from the rock. That union of wall and stone was a strength, but it was also a hidden weakness. An attacker might not tunnel under. They might try to bring the mountain down on you. The answer to that was the Spur, a colossal wedge-shaped mass of masonry, built right where the castle wall met the living rock of the cliff. It wasn't a tower. It wasn't a gate. It was a geological intervention, a man-made buttress against the earth itself. Think of a stone plow, gigantic and permanent, angled out from the base of the wall. Its whole design was about deflection. That smooth, sloping face was meant to guide force away. If an enemy triggered a rock slide above, or if a natural slide happened, the tons of falling debris wouldn't hit the flat, vulnerable junction of wall and cliff. It would hit this angled stone wedge. The Spur would take the impact. It would channel the rubble and stone to the sides, away from the foundations. A shock absorber on a monumental scale. But its purpose went further. It was also a defense against the most determined attack, sapping. Mining at the base of a cliffside wall was dangerous for the attackers. But if it worked, it could be catastrophic. The Spur made that nearly impossible. Its massive, solid construction was at the most critical point. There was no weak seam to target. To undermine the wall, sappers would first have to get through this mountain of purpose-laid stone. It was like trying to dig through a hillside. The effort and time required made the attempt almost unthinkable. Building a Spur was an act of profound foresight. It meant the defender's mind thinking several moves ahead, anticipating not just armies and engines, but the landscape itself being turned against them. It was an acknowledgement. The fortress's greatest ally, the impenetrable cliff, could also be its Achilles' heel in the hands of a clever foe, so they armored that junction. They reinforced the marriage of castle and crag with a monument to resilience. The Spur stood as a silent guardian against a threat that rarely came. But if it did, it would mean total ruin. Its presence was a statement that here, even the laws of physics and geology had been considered, and an answer had been built in stone. Stone only answers the questions it was built for. The last defense, the greatest one, was the one that could think. The garrison, all those clever mechanisms, the sheer walls, the hidden doors, they were inert. Just a complex sculpture until the people showed up. The soldiers, the craftsmen, the cooks, the knights, they were the castle's consciousness, its will. A fortress wasn't a thing you had, it was a thing you did, and doing it was this relentless, communal act of intelligence. That human element started long before any army appeared. It started in the storerooms, a quartermaster counting barrels of salted fish, sacks of grain. He wasn't just taking inventory, he was calculating time. Measuring the duration of a future siege in weeks and months. His work set the most critical variable, how long the spirit could hold out before the body's needs took over. A well-supplied garrison wasn't just fed, it was confident. It could look down at the army camped outside and know, with a cold certainty, that they would grow weary and hungry long before the walls would. Then came the training, and this wasn't just practicing with a sword. It was learning a choreography of survival. Every man had a station, a specific place on the wall walk during an alarm, a specific task if the hoardings needed repair under fire. Teams drilled on operating the Portcullis winches, on manning the trebuchet, on executing a sortie from the postern gate. They practiced until it was instinct, so when the real chaos began, the thunder of catapults, the screams, the smoke, the garrison didn't descend into panic. They fell into a rehearsed routine. The castle became a machine they knew how to operate blindfolded. That discipline turned fear into focused action. But the greatest challenge was invisible. It was the mind. A siege is a slow, grinding pressure. Its boredom punctuated by terror. The defenders are trapped within their own walls, watching the same faces, hearing the same distant taunts. Morale is a resource like water or grain. It can be depleted. A wise Castellan, the commander, knew this. He would organize games to break the monotony. Ensure fair rations, walk the walls, speaking to the men, reinforcing their purpose. He might even stage a small, successful sortie, not for military gain, but for the psychological lift it gave his troops. A reminder that they were not just prey waiting in a cage. They were a force that could still strike back. The loyalty of these men was the final, unbreakable lock. The one thing an attacker couldn't engineer, couldn't mine, and couldn't batter down. This loyalty was woven from many threads, duty to a sworn lord, belief in a shared cause, the simple, powerful bond of defending home and family, often sheltered right there in the bailey behind them. A garrison united by trust could endure hardships that would shatter a force held together only by pay or fear. They would ration the last moldy crusts, stand their ground at a breached wall, fighting for every inch of stone. Their spirit became the true mortar holding everything together. In the end, the story of the Unconquerable Castle isn't a story of rock and iron. It's a story of people. Ingenious architects gave them the tools, but it was the garrison's courage, their endurance, their unwavering will that breathed life into the stone. They were the final, most formidable layer of the defense. The human heart, fortified by towering walls, was what truly made a siege impossible. From a strategic hilltop down to the disciplined garrison, those 25 layers were one connected mind. A castle wasn't just random walls and towers. It was a living system, a kind of symphony in stone and strategy, where everything from the deep bedrock up to the banners worked together. The moat would funnel attackers toward the Barbican, and the Barbican would channel them into that bent entrance of the Gatehouse. The Gatehouse then fed them into the killing ground between the concentric walls. And over it all, the keep watched, the final, unyielding argument. So defense was a process. Each layer was there to break the assault's momentum, to consume time and lives, and to present a new, harder problem right when the last one seemed solved. It forced armies to think on a colossal scale, to invent bigger and bigger siege engines, to undertake campaigns that lasted years, not weeks. Warfare itself changed in the shadow of these places. It became a slow, grinding contest, logistics and endurance against architectural cunning. Now, these structures are more than picturesque ruins. They're monuments to a relentless intellectual arms race, a testament to a time when the greatest strength wasn't always the thickness of a wall. It was the cleverness of its design, how it used every advantage of the land, the material, the human spirit. They remind us that true resilience is layered. It's adaptable, and it's always thinking several moves ahead.